And first, thanks everybody for staying. I was kind of worried like everybody will have gone home, but no. So thank you all for turning up. So I'm going to be talking about supply chain security and kind of concrete lessons that we can learn from sort of actual security incidents. I've got a clicker, we'll be professional. And one thing I kind of tend to worry a little bit about with security content, like talks and blogs, but also tooling, to be honest, is that we tend to focus on attacks and problems and detection, but a little bit less on, we kind of offer like vague and hand-wavy advice on how to actually prevent future attacks. And it's probably something I've been guilty of in the past, and I guess the thing is, it's much easier to do a talk or a blog about an outrageous hack or some shocking statistics and things like that, and turn that into sort of a compelling story, and then you end with like a vague statement like, check your sources, or don't do that, or implement zero trust. And that doesn't really help people fix things. And I kind of think we need to do a bit better than that as an industry. And we should be pushing more concrete, actionable advice that organizations can sort of immediately implement and use. So we should be pressurizing organizations to take simple, immediate actions, things like implementing or enforcing multi-factor authentication. Oh, I missed my slides. But yeah, in this talk, I'll be looking at actual incidents and what we can do to prevent attacks like those in the future. But first, I do have a little bit of good news. I gave you a slight preview there, but I have gone through all the cybersecurity reports I could find. And I think I've identified the person responsible for the vast majority of them, because it's always the same person. It's this person. And they are everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Now, in most pictures, and there's a lot of pictures, so it's not very good operational security, but in most pictures, the face is obscured. But in this picture, they're using gloves, which I think has to be a bit of a giveaway. And like in all the other ones, the hands are hidden. So I think in all the pictures, they have gloves. And I do kind of wonder how you can type like that, but I guess they're showing off. And in some, you do get a glimpse of the face. Maybe it's a different one, I don't know. In this one, you have gloves and the magnifying glass. It does slightly make me doubt their credentials, to be honest. But yeah, if we arrest this person, I'm pretty sure global cybercrime is going to drop off a cliff. Okay, the boring slide. I'm Adrian Mouat. I'm a DevRel engineer at ChainGuard. I did once write a book on Docker. I don't buy it because it's 10 years out of date. If you want to find me, though, yeah, it's actually quite easy because my name is relatively unusual. But that QR code will take you. No, we'll share the slides later. Okay, so I'm going to go through about 3 incidents. The first one I'm going to start with is codecov. So this, I mean, in some ways it feels like a long time ago, but it's not really. I don't really think things have advanced that much since 2021. Codecov is quite a useful service. Basically what it does is it'll report on how much of your source code is covered by tests. So if somebody submits a PR, you can figure out your test coverage goes up or down. Yeah, so definitely useful, but they had an incident. And they didn't release full details of exactly what happened, but from their blog and a few other things, they kind of pieced it all together. Definitely what happened was they published various Docker images. And in one of those Docker images, it turned out there was a secret that shouldn't have been there. And that secret provided access to their Google Cloud storage. So attackers found that secret, and they rifled through the cloud storage, and they found the bash uploader script used by codecov. And this was a script that their customers would use to upload their own code to codecov for analysis. And that meant all the customers were running this script as part of the CI/CD. And so what the attackers did was they just added one single line to that script. And all that line did was send all the environment variables to a server they controlled. Now that might sound a bit innocuous because it's just environment variables, but do remember that this is running in CI/CD. So quite often in like CI/CD pipelines, people put like secrets and stuff in the environment variables, and now they're all being sent to this server controlled by attackers. And a lot of people had a pretty bad day. And it included some pretty big customers like Twilio, Confluent, Rapid7, and HashiCorp. And some of these customers did their own reports on what had happened because they were impacted. And reading those reports, it sounds like most of them, I think they just realized they'd been impacted and rotated credentials. I'm not really sure they were actually lost any information as a result of this. But these are 4 big companies, and they have dedicated security teams, I'm pretty sure, and they're able to respond to things like this. There would have been dozens, hundreds of smaller companies that were much smaller, slower to respond, and I suspect had a much worse time. I do want to give codecov a fair bit of praise, because they did immediately come out and tell people, hey, this has happened, and tell them what they need to do to fix things to make sure it didn't get worse. That being said, I would have liked to have seen a bit more information on exactly what happened, like why was there a secret in a Docker image, and why didn't they notice the script had been modified. But I can take a bit of a guess at what happened with the build secret, or the Google Cloud secret. One possibility is it was just in the build context and got copied into the image by accident. Another possibility is he did something like this, and I have seen this before. Basically, in Docker builds, there's like a layered file system. So although if I run this image, I won't be able to get to the my secret file. But if you know what you're doing, you can go back to higher layer, and I can get the my secret file. So if you ever do something like this, you've actually exposed the my secret file to anybody that has that image. What should you do instead? Yeah, you can do this if you want. So you can use Docker build secrets, and that will store it in a temporary file system, and it never hits the image, if you like. But honestly, the better idea is to try and keep secrets completely away from your Docker builds. And the third option is to squash the file system, so there's only one layer. But yeah, by far the best option is don't have the secrets there at all. So I did do some investigation. I went onto the Wayback Machine on the Internet Archive, and I looked at the actual script that they were telling people to use in GitHub, and that's it here. There's nothing too surprising. We go right down to the bottom, though, and we do see this, trying to walk off the stage, the bash pipe through curl command. And this command does there's a lot of this, and it gets a bad rep. And it's definitely not perfect. I do have some issues with it. I'd actually argue it's probably not the worst thing ever. It is HTTPS, so we are pretty sure that whatever we're downloading does come from codecov. Like, it's very hard to do a man-in-the-middle attack here. There isn't any sudo, so at least we're not piping into sudo. But yeah, I'd really want to see a sort of checksum or GPG check or some sort of verification of the integrity of the file. I mean, one question is just what happens if the transfer gets interrupted? You'd be running half a script. It doesn't wait till it downloads it all before it starts running it. So, not great. If you do ever come across something that tells you to do things in a similar install fashion, what I'd recommend is take apart the 2 steps. So do your download and then do your execution. You can also just take a look at the code. Is it a good idea? Except you can't always be doing that. One thing you can do, though, is add in a checksum or even a GPG check if it's supported. And that will sort of alert you if the file ever changes. And then you can go and check the changes in the file. I took this example from the Docker Redis image. So this is like the official build for the Redis image. And you can see what happens when they download Redis. They do check that hasn't changed against a sort of checksum. And that's basically how you can do that sort of check. GPG is a little bit more complicated, but the nice thing about GPG is that I only need to do it once, if you like, and it'll be signed with the same signature, so I won't need to update this check. Whereas this check will need to be updated each time that checksum changes. So GPG is a bit nicer. And this is from the same file, this time for the Gosu utility. What I would say, though, is if you're distributing software, so you have your own thing that you want people to download and use, if you can, use a package manager. So let them get it from Homebrew or something similar. And then that will take care of all the verification and so on. If not, yeah, one nice thing you can do is on your download site, provide things like checksums and signatures, like on your release page, for example. Next thing I want to talk about, 12-factor app. Who's heard of the 12-factor app? Ah, good. Yeah, so this is really seminal. I love the 12-factor app. It was really important in how we started developing what we now call cloud-native applications, I guess. But it does say this about storing config in the environment. And it does even explicitly mention credentials to external services, such as Amazon S3 or Twitter. And I'd actually say that's not great advice. And the reason is that environment variables are not designed to store secrets. They were never meant to be private, if you like. I can just type env and I've dumped all the secrets out in plain text. So they're just far too easily shared, and they get printed in logs. Like quite often, somebody might ask for logs on a server or whatever, you type env and it's suddenly printed all your secrets. So I would seriously try to avoid having things in environment variables. What should you do instead? Well, the best one is not have those secrets at all. See if you can use something like identity federation so you don't require that secret. If you do need to use secrets, use something like a secret manager. The clouds all have them. AWS has one, and Google, etc. But there are also things like for Kubernetes as the external secret something. And also, Kubernetes directly supports having secret files, which will use temporary volumes and stuff. And still a much better way than environment variables. Okay, the second attack I want to talk about is change files. So that's from this year, back in March. Change files was a pretty popular GitHub action, and all it really did was tell you a list of the changed files between two commits. And the attackers pushed an update that meant that the action leaked secrets to logs with a little bit of obfuscation. And then the attackers could then find the secrets and exploit them. This affected the released version of the change files action. So any user of the GitHub change files action that had not pinned to an older version had automatically exposed all their GitHub secrets to the runner. Or exposed all the GitHub secrets that the runner had. And yeah, that wasn't a lot of fun. It affected a lot of organizations. We actually used change files at ChainGuard. We got lucky, and I'll explain how in a minute. And for a lot of people, that I think was the main story about this attack. Yeah, people had a bad day and moved on. But more details emerged over time, and it kind of got even crazier. And so the first question you probably would ask is, how was the change files repo compromised? Well, assuming TG Actions didn't mean to do this. And the reason is that they had a dependency on another action called ReviewDog. And ReviewDog runs lint checks to check for adherence to things like coding standards. And the ReviewDog action was also compromised. In this case, the compromise seems to have been a leaked access token. There was one really odd thing about ReviewDog, is they had a large number of approved contributors, and they seem to have this automated invite flow. So if you worked on, I think it was their plugins, you could automatically become a contributor, which, yeah, that's probably a bad idea. Don't give people automatic access to your GitHub. Anyway, it turns out the attacker managed to obtain a personal access token for a ReviewDog contributor and used that, and then did a similar attack to the one they would later do on changed files to compromise ReviewDog, as in they dumped secrets into a file, and then you could then retrieve that file later. Yeah, and then you went, the same thing, change files. And so the next question you might ask is, why did they do this? What was the goal? And I don't know how many users these actions had, but the main ReviewDog repo has about 8,500 stars, and change files has about 2,500 stars. So it's probably safe to say there's hundreds or thousands of affected users between the two attacks. So it kind of sounds like the point of the attack was to get as many credentials and secrets as possible, right? You're leaking secrets for hundreds of orgs. Some of them are undoubtedly going to be slow to retake credentials and be potential victims. You'd actually be wrong. Every single one of them was collateral damage, because there's only one single target. Anybody want to guess? Anybody know? No. No? It was me, oh yeah. No, maybe not too surprisingly, it was Coinbase. And so presumably the attackers had some great plan to steal millions in crypto. It was ultimately unsuccessful, but just think about it from like a supply chain POV. So they didn't go after Coinbase head on. They knew Coinbase's weakest link wasn't in their own security, but instead of the security of their dependencies. And they didn't even go after changed files directly. They went, after a vulnerability in one of changed files dependencies. So it was kind of sophisticated, and at least so far as it kind of chained multiple things together. And it definitely showed a level of patience. The thing that really kind of annoys me, though, is they just didn't care about all the thousands of people that they affected. I mean, thousands and thousands of hours wasted like dealing with the fallout from this. Like, the attacker didn't need to make everything public. It was just the easiest way to get the secrets out. One thing I should say is if you want to read more about this attack, and I think most of the other attacks, there's a few great resources like Wiz, who got really good blogs on this stuff, but also Socket. So I'll go and check those ones. So what could you do about this? One thing that seems fairly obvious, to be honest, is verify contributors. And although it seems obvious, it's very hard to do. I mean, I can say don't have an automated workflow to add people to your GitHub, but that's probably fairly obvious, to be honest. You can do things like enforcing commit signing, so everybody that contributes has to sign their commits. And you can do things like run for checks for malware, so all your PRs are checked for things like that. But honestly, it's very hard to vet people. One attack that I nearly talked about was the XZ, I won't say XZ, but I guess it's XZ. And the XZ one was interesting because they basically had a contributor who'd been contributing valid contributions for years, I think, and then turned out to be presumably a nation state attacker. I don't know what you do there. Another thing you can do is restrict tag updates. So that would have helped. In this case, I think the review dog one, they changed a tag to point to the malicious commit or something. And you can restrict tag updates by editing rule sets. There's also a very handy page on GitHub. I'll share these slides, but basically there's a GitHub page that you can go through and it will check your sort of recommended security config. Pinning. So you can pin actions. You've probably seen this with Docker images. You can do something very similar with GitHub Actions, and you can pin to an exact version. And that means you'll always use that exact version. And that, if you did that, you wouldn't have been immediately impacted by this attack. The problem, of course, is you need to update that hash. You want to stay up to date with the latest version, so you're probably going to have some sort of automated workflow to update. And that's what ChainGuard did, and that's the reason we weren't impacted by this, and we'd never actually updated to the malicious version, but we did have, Dependabot running, so it would have updated us at some point, and would we have seen it? Maybe, maybe not. Oh yeah, very similar thing for container images. Honestly, I think this is the biggest takeaway of the whole talk. Please try and get rid of as many long-lived credentials as you possibly can. In every single attack, there's been basically long-lived credentials has been a problem. If you can, use something like Identity Federation, OIDC, something like that. Get rid of the secrets at all, if at all possible. If you can't, try and use really short-lived tokens. You can do things like have a token that only lives for minutes and for the single call that you need, for example. And in GitHub's particular case, we actually wrote something called Octo STS. that we use to get rid of personal access tokens in a few cases. So you can go and check that out as well. Okay, the last incident I want to talk about was just from last month. It's called Shai Hulud. And this was where like 500 NPM packages and associated GitHub repos were compromised. And the attacker extracted secrets from the environment. The big thing here was it had worm-like behavior. So that's why it's called Shai Hulud. Most of you are probably aware the worms in Dune are called the Shai Hulud. But also, if you looked at the source code, they did name some stuff Shai Hulud in the actual attack. So that's where the name comes from. But it was kind of interesting. Basically, if you ran a compromised NPM package, as well as trying to get the secrets out of your account, it would also try to infect any NPM packages that you had the right to publish to. And so what was happening was, everybody that ran it was like infecting further packages, and it was escalating. And so many people, or so many packages got compromised that GitHub had to step in and take action, and basically they stopped accepting pushes with what they called IOC, or indicators of compromise, but yeah, basically the hack script. So one really interesting thing, actually in all of these attacks, is exfiltration, because that actually tends to be a sticky point for the attackers. How do they get the data out of the systems without exposing themselves? And you go, so in the first case, in the codecov one, they actually used a server they controlled, I believe. Now that's got a couple of drawbacks. One is that's probably like a single IP address. So that's quite easy to block, or if it was DNS, it can be blocked or taken over or whatever. And that stops the attack dead. And the other thing is, if you control a server, there's a trail of breadcrumbs there that could potentially lead back to the attacker. So that's, I think, why you saw in the change files attack that they made everything public, just because there's less exposure for the attacker. Even though other people could go and download the secrets, they didn't really care. Actually, to be fair, they did encrypt them with base 64, but obviously that doesn't do much. In this case, they kind of did a little bit of both. So they used Trufflehog actually to find all the secrets they could, and then they sent them all to this webhook. So you've probably seen webhook testing services. Basically, you can curl them and it'll print out all the arguments they were called with, which is really handy for testing web services. And so that's what they used. I guess they would just go and look at the logs and pull out the secrets. But the interesting thing was they were on the free tier, and they actually got rate limited, which kind of sounds funny, but then you realize the reason they're on the free tier is because they don't want to supply a credit card, because that would lead back to them. And also, they actually were still exposing all the secrets because it was in the workflow log, where you could see the call to curl. And the other thing they did was they made private repos, or they made public copies of private repos where they could. Yeah, and actually, if you went and looked on GitHub and did a search for Shai Hulud at the time, you would find all these 697 repos there that were presumably, a few of these are just talking about the worm, but the ones down here I think were actual compromised repositories that had private repos that were made into public copies with this Shai Hulud migration description. So one other thing that I noticed from the GitHub response and the NPM response from this is that it appears that quite a few people published the NPM and Cargo and PyPy and so on from the laptops, which sounds kind of crazy to me. So if you're responsible for NPM or something like that, packages, please don't publish from your laptop. Set up a proper CI/CD workflow and do it from there. I'm really surprised that people do that. It just seems, frankly, a little bit unprofessional. But also, you're risking, all your secrets on your laptop being exposed if something like this happens. And yeah, what you can do instead is use something called trusted publishing. So this is relatively new. And in the GitHub blog, they talked about this. So if you have NPM packages or something, also PyPy and Cargo support it, look up trusted publishing. Basically, instead of using a long-lived token, what you do is you can set up in well, I'll show you an example. So this is for PyPy. What we can say is this GitHub action is allowed to publish packages to our PyPy. So it kind of inverts the control a bit, but it means you no longer have the need for this long-lived secret in the GitHub action. So it's one less thing to worry about. Another thing I found interesting about this attack was they used TruffleHog. Has anybody seen TruffleHog? Yeah, a few people. So it's actually quite a nice tool. It's really useful for defenders as well as attackers. You can run it on your own code, and it'll show you any places that you might be exposing secrets that you didn't mean to. So you can run it on like Docker images or VMs or any environment, really. And yeah, I recommend you think about running something like that, because otherwise the attackers will do it for you. MFA, hopefully I don't really need to explain what MFA is. You can enforce that on org level, though. So you might want to go into your GitHub orgs and say everybody has to use MFA, and do think about buying keys. It's a little bit faster than Google Authenticator, etc. Okay, I think I'm getting close in time. I was going to do a recap. I'm going to share these slides with you, I think. The big one I want you to take away is avoid long-lived credentials. Like, of all the tips, I think that's by far the most important one. Try and get rid of as many long-lived credentials as possible. I do also have some tooling here that I'll let you go through the slides for. What I want to end with, though, is this kind of sobering quote from a ransomware hacker. And what he said was, if all ransomware groups suddenly became cybersecurity specialists, and those who are cybersecurity specialists started pen testing, the ransomware would end. So basically, the defenders can't do what the attackers can, but the attackers can do the defender's job. And I sort of want you to think about that for a minute, as it's pretty scary if you ask me. But what I hope is that this talk has gone just a little bit of the way towards addressing that balance, and that you've seen some of the ways in which attacks work, and that you have some practical steps to address them. Okay, that was it. Thank you very much.